Okay, everyone, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for coming and for being on time. Really appreciate it. So, hello, welcome to From Data to Design, Rethinking Fashion's Approach to Plus-Size Shoppers. Or not? Okay, we'll do that. So before I get started, I just want to give a bunch of thank yous because it took a lot of people to get both this grant and this presentation together. So first I'd like to thank FIT President Dr. Joyce Brown and the Diversity Collective for selecting my grant to be funded. Very important. Thank you. And then I'd like to thank Deliway and Nina in the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, who really helped guide me through this process, and especially Nina in the office. She mailed out personally everyone's stipends for participating, so huge help there. I'd then like to thank my student researcher, Margaret Cordero, who unfortunately couldn't be here today because she went home for spring break already. But once I measured everyone and had everyone's information in spreadsheets, she took all 300 of those spreadsheets and organized them into one neat spreadsheet and gave me some initial data. So she did a huge, huge, huge job, and I could not have done this without her for sure. Then I'd like to thank the Fashion Design Department Chair, Suku, who lent me her office to measure all the people that I measured in person. We did it in her office, which was really lovely of her to give us that space. And I would like to thank as well our department coordinators, Crystal, Felicia, and Nadine, who helped organize that, make sure that security let everyone upstairs, and everything that went into that, and welcoming our guests to the school. I'd then like to thank Joanna and the FIT events team for meeting with me to produce this event, the second half of the grant, and making sure that we had AV here to record it so that it could be archived. And speaking of, I'd like to thank the FIT Library and our institutional repository for archiving not just the video of this presentation, but all of the data so that it is available to both FIT faculty and students, but also any fashion industry professionals who would like to use it. And last but definitely not least, I'd like to thank all of my research participants because I quite truly could not do it without them, and many of them are here, so thank you so much for coming and participating. So before I jump in, I just want to give a little bit of background to myself and why I'm even interested in doing this study in the first place. So I am an alumni of both here, FIT, and also Pratt Institute. Upon graduating, I then worked in the junior sector, so that means making clothes for like tweens and sometimes adults. And I worked as an assistant designer, then associate designer, and I also did technical design work. And then in 2014, I launched my inclusive brand, Smart Glamour, which these pictures are from. And I just really immersed myself in making sure that the fashion industry was inclusive and accessible to all people. And through that, I have been collecting size data and measurements on my own for a decade. And once I became a teacher, I realized this information needed to be available to other faculty and students. And I tried to think of how I could make that happen. And when I saw the opportunity for the grant, I said, oh, I can measure more people, and then I can give that information to the school and make sure that it is accessible to our future fashion designers and the faculty that teach them. So I want to start this presentation with a fact, a fact that has been known for a while now and is not what I'm going to be talking about today. So I want to make sure that everyone knows this fact so that when we move into this deeper information, this is the foundation of that knowledge, which is that 67 to 72% of American women and femmes wear plus sizes. In 2018, the average waist size was 38.1 inches, and in 2023, it was 38.9. However, as of 2022, only 19% of U.S. women's wear fashion revenue is from plus-size clothing. So even though this group is by far the majority of people, we are very much underserving them. And that leads me to why I decided to do this research. So The title of the grant was Accurate Size Research, the Collection of Data and Vital Importance of Realistic Consumer Sizes. For this research, I measured 300 people who live in the US, are 18 years and up, shop for women's clothing, and have a waistline of 34 inches and up. The presentation will go over both the measurement data and shopping habits and attitudes of these participants. Video of this presentation and the full measurement data will then be archived in FIT's institutional repository, where researchers, faculty, students, and fashion industry professionals will have access to it. So, why 34 inches? I'd like to introduce you to the largest waist size available at all of these very high-end brands. So Tory Burch, 34 inches. Carolina Herrera, 36 inches. Courrèges, 33 inches. Miu Miu, 34 inches. Stella McCartney, 32.5 inches. Louis Vuitton, 33 inches. Diane van Furstenberg, 34.5. Gucci, 32.7. Versace, 33.8. Kalina Strada, 32 inches. Tom Ford, 35 inches. Yves Saint Laurent, 34.5 inches. Celine, 31.5. Rodarte, 34.5. Oscar de la Renta, 34. And Parenzo Schouler, 34. Again, to remind, the average U.S. woman and femme's waist is 38.9 inches. So it seems that perhaps we are lacking the accurate information in order to make clothes for the majority of the population, hence beginning where everyone else seems to leave off. And then I'd like to move into a quote, all the way from 1915 from Women's Wear. The article was called, "How Many Fat Women in Your Town?" And the quote is, "Every once in a while, a stout customer used to ask me while I was waiting on her, or used to ask the sales girls, 'Don't you ever buy anything for fat women?' Whatever the response we made was bound to be a lame one, because the simple truth in the matter was that I didn't think there were enough fat women to make it pay. After a while, though, I began to keep my eyes peeled for the stout ones. You haven't any idea how many fat women there are in the world until you begin to sell something that they want." And that is from a manager of a Midwestern department store reported to Women's Wear. And I found this quote in a book called Fashion Before Plus Size by Lauren Downing Peters. If anyone is more interested in this topic, highly recommend this book. I think I chose to start with this quote because I want to prove that this is not a new problem. It's a problem that's been going on for over 100 years. So, let's talk about our participants. First of all, as I mentioned at the beginning, I measured 300 people who buy women's wear. The fashion industry is incredibly gender separated, women and men, but we know that there are many people who fit outside of those boxes, and I did not want to exclude anyone. However, anyone who wears women's clothing. If you go to a store and you identify with the clothes that are labeled under women, then you and your data is important to me as someone who designs women's clothing. So 84.1% of the participants identified as women, 10.7 identified as non-binary and or gender fluid, 2.9 identified as femme, and 2.2 preferred not to say, but confirmed that they do shop in the women's wear section. Then I asked, do you identify as disabled? And 74.8 said no, while 25.2, so a quarter of who I measured, said yes. And then I just wanted to take a quick look at their heights, as I think height is such an interesting tool to look at as well. I measured folks all the way from 4'6" to 6'2". The average was 5.5. The median was 5'6", and the mode was also 5'6". So you can see far and away the most of the participants were between 5'3" and 5'5", which makes sense because the average height of US women or femme is 5'4". So lands right in there. So we're going to move on to their actual body measurements, and first we're going to do just kind of the general basics, and then we're going to do some deeper dives. This is the sizes of the participants that I measured. So starting at a 34-inch waist gives us starting at a size extra large, which sometimes can be considered the end of straight sizes and sometimes can be considered the beginning of plus sizes. And I measured people all the way through a 14X. Now, you'll notice that the largest group were folks who wear a 2X, followed by 3 and 5, followed by 4. So the majority of the folks that I measured land in the 2X to 5X range. I'd then like to point out the similarity of the amount of people I measured who wear a 1X and wear a 6X and a 7X. Even when stores carry plus sizes, they very often stop at a 3. You're lucky if you get to a 6. Over a 6, very, very hard time to find. So just looking at the comparison between the 1Xs and the 6X and 7Xs tells me that a lot of stores who decide to stop at 3 really need to consider at least going to a 6 or a 7. Then I'd like to draw your attention to the similarity between the extra larges and the 8Xs. I think if I told fellow fashion designers that they should not carry an extra large or smaller, they would look at me like I had 3 heads. But if I told them that they should absolutely carry an 8X, they would also look at me like I had 3 heads. However, I measured just as many people who wear an 8X as I did who wear an extra large. Then I'm going to split this up into bust, waist, hip. When you look at a size chart to shop, those are the 3 measurements that you are immediately seeing, although many, many, many more measurements are important. Those are kind of the 3 go-tos, so that's what I want to show next. So this is the range of the bust measurements of everyone that I measured, starting all the way down from 33 to 36 and going all the way up to 75 to 78, with the highest amount being in the 45 to 48 inch range. Here are our waist measurements. Again, it says 33 to 36, but starting at 34 inches and going all the way up to, once again, between 75 and 78, with the highest amount being between 36 and 39, followed by 39 to 42, followed by 42 to 45. And hips. So starting all the way down at 39 to 42, coming all the way up to 93 and 96, with the most amount being between 51 and 54, followed by 48 to 51, followed by 45 to 48. And I wanted to take those measurements and create an easy to understand visual. So I used a violin plot so that you can really see where the majority of people are on this chart and where the outsiders kind of lie. And then I'm giving you the averages at the bottom. So the average bust that I measured was 49.5, the average waist 45, and the average hip was 54.5. Then I want to talk about this slide for a moment, which is something that anytime I'm talking about size, I really like to bring up, and I always like to check, which is how many people fit neatly into a size on a size chart versus how many people are between sizes. So as you can see, only 20% fit neatly into a size chart, while 80 do not. And that might seem really, really big, which it is. And that might seem like perhaps there's something wrong with the size chart that you used. Well, the size chart that I used was my size chart, and that size chart, when I first created it, was based off of a lot of consumer market research, pulling many, many other size charts, both straight size and plus size and inclusive brands, and creating something that would feel recognizable to shoppers. Then over the decade that I was measuring people constantly, I would stop every once in a while and analyze that data and change my size charts. So I didn't use my size charts just because I feel confident that they are, correct and good, or as good as they can be. I also use them because there aren't really any other size charts that are as inclusive as mine. I didn't want to have a participant be measured and then not be able to find them on a size chart, which is so often the case. And so everyone that I measured is included in the size chart that I am comparing this to. I then want to, kind of reconfirm in your mind that this is not an outlier. This happens every time I measure people. So back about 6 years ago, I measured just under 200 people. Again, on my own. This is just what I do, apparently for fun, is measure people. And this is the split, set size to between size. It's pretty much exactly the same. When I share this data, I usually share it in the context of talking about the argument that plus-size folks are too hard to dress because they are too varied. However, when we take these figures and we separate them, straight size to plus-size folks, this is what it looks like. And the fact of the matter is, this will never stop happening because people are not made off of charts. People are born, and we're all very different from each other. And size charts were not created to make good fit. They were created to make more money. So, with all that in mind, let's dive deeper into the measurements of the participants. And the first thing I love to talk about is apex placement. If you are not a fashion designer, you may not know what that means. The apex is the fullest part of the chest. And I love to start here because this is one of the two, in my opinion, most important areas to get fit correct for a person. And that is because the apex determines where the fullness of the garment sits. And if it is in the wrong spot, it does not matter how correct everything else is. You will put the garment on and say, this does not fit me, and you will take it off. So this is a look at the apex placement correlated to bust and waist measurements of all 300 people. And then I have little summaries on the next pages here. So both bust and waist categories show a clear upward trend in apex placement. The increase is steeper in the higher size categories, particularly with bust. This helps inform how much to lower apex points in patterns for larger sizes. So my hope is that when future students and faculty and professionals look into this data, they gravitate towards something like this and know a little bit of a clearer picture as how to grade their patterns to put the apex fullness in the correct spot. I'd then like to move on to shoulder to waist length. So as I mentioned before, when you're shopping, you're mostly just looking at chest, waist, hip. But there's so many other things that come about when it comes to how things fit you properly, and a lot of them have to do with like the proportions of your body. And the length from your shoulder to your waist is a big one. So this is what it looks like across sizes of bust and waist measurements, how long from their high point shoulder, which is where your shoulder hits your neck, to their high natural waist. Shoulder to waist length increases steadily as sizes increase. However, it is more dependent on the bust increasing than it is on the waist, indicating shoulder to waist length is more directly tied to bust fullness than it is to waist or overall size of the person. So I think this is also an important thing for designers to pay attention to. I think often, and we'll touch on this more shortly, we just assume that as people get bigger, they get bigger all over. And also as that people get taller, they get big all over. But it's not always that simple. It may just be that someone has a larger bust, and that is increasing their length, not necessarily that they are taller or that other parts of their body are also bigger. Then I want to take a look at across fronts and across backs. So again, for our non-designers in the room, this is the measurement on your upper flat chest and across your high back, basically measuring from like armhole to armhole. And this makes sure that when you put garments on, they sit on your center properly. They're not falling off your shoulders, etc. And you can see the increase here compared to bust and waist measurements. While both across fronts and across backs increase as body circumference measurements increase, across fronts increase at a higher rate. This shows correlation to bust size as a key indicator of across front measurements. So really, these past few that we've gone over just reiterate my feeling that apex placement and folks' chest mass is really the most important factor of getting good fit. So now I'd like to swap over to leg and arm measurements, and leg will be compared to hip measurements, and arms will be compared to bust measurements. And the three bars, the three colors that you see are for thigh, knee, ankle. So obviously they are all steadily increasing. And arms are bicep, elbow, wrist, also steadily increasing. While all leg and arm circumferences grow as body circumferences grow, thighs and biceps grow the most, while ankles and wrists grow the least. For example, biceps that I measured ranged from 11.25 to 30, while wrist measurements only changed from 5 to 9.5. Now, that might seem like common sense to you. We understand that wrists are pretty small and they don't really get too much bigger. But what this also proves is that we cannot always assume that every part of the body is going to increase at the same rate as other parts. And then I'd like to talk about arm lengths. So being someone who's made plus size clothes for well over a decade, I have heard the complaint many times that people assume that just because I'm getting bigger, my arms are getting longer. So here's how arm lengths increase based on height. And I've given bicep length, elbow length, and wrist length. And those are all being measured from the top of the cap, which means the top of your shoulder, where your sleeve gets set into your garment. And I wanted to put these two charts next to each other to show you the correlation of arm length when you compare it to height versus arm length when you compare it to bust. If you don't know too much about scatter plots, basically what this is showing you is on your left, the arm length versus height, everything is very neatly spread and going upward. However, arm length versus bust is a wild party. And what that means is it shows a clear positive correlation between height and arm length. As height increases, arm lengths tend to increase as well. This is evident from the strong upward trend in the height versus arm length chart. In contrast, the relationship between bust size and arm length is weak. With data points scattered widely and no significant trend, this indicates that bust size does not meaningfully predict arm length. So just because a person is getting larger does not mean their arms are getting longer. So we should get rid of that assumption. And this brings me to my second most important fit data point, I feel, to get clothes that fit you well, which is your rises. If you are unaware of what rises are, they are the measurement from your center crotch up to your waistband, and then the same in the back. So they both start in the middle between your legs, and one goes up this way and one goes up the other way. And similar to apex placement, if the rises are off for you, it does not matter that the waist and the hip are the right shape, because they're going to be in the wrong place. So you have to get to the right place first before we can worry about things being the right circumference. So this shows the front and back rises of everyone based on their waist size, going up. And this chart shows the difference between your front and back rise. So most folks have a smaller front rise and a bigger back rise. So knowing the difference between those two numbers is really important when you're making patterns. And here are the summaries. So front and back rise increase with waist size. The first chart shows a steady increase in both the front and the back rise measurements as waist size categories grow. This indicates that as body size increases, garment rise must also increase to accommodate body proportions and maintain comfort and coverage. Back rises increase more than the front rise does. While both front and back rises grow, the back rise grows slightly faster. This reflects the body's natural shape. Larger waists tend to correspond with more pronounced curvature at the back, requiring additional length for proper fit. Then, the rise difference also increases, but less dramatically. The second chart shows the difference between back and front rise also increases slightly with waist size. The change is modest, but suggests that the rise curve becomes more pronounced in larger sizes. So again, having this data readily available to people that make pants is how we will end up with better fitting pants and jumpsuits and bodysuits and underwear. Okay. Then we're going to move on to front versus back percentages. So human beings are not equal in the front and the back. This is always brand new information when I teach intro to sewing, and everyone edits their pant pattern and they cut it out and then they put the legs on top of each other and they go, Miss Dunn, I messed something up, my pants don't match. And I'm like, no, They're not supposed to match. If you were the same in the front and the back, we would just cut one pant leg 4 times. But we don't. We make front pant legs and back pant legs because we are different in the front and the back. And this chart shows the percentage of the body that is in the front, bust, waist, and hip. So bust front percentage remains relatively consistent across sizes. Waist front percentage fluctuates a bit more and peaks at a 4X. Hip front percentage shows a gradual increase, especially in the upper sizes, indicating a shift to mass distribution toward the front. So sometimes as folks get larger, they may develop larger bellies in the front, and that would accommodate or explain the percentage growing in the front compared to the back as the sizes increase. Now I want to talk about correlations between height and shoulder to waist, height and inseam, and shoulder to waist and inseam. So I think the most common sense one is probably the one in the center there, that as you get taller, your inseam grows, right? However, as you get taller, your shoulder to waist can also grow. But as we touched on before with shoulder to waist, it is not that simple. It also ties into your bust measurement. And then I just wanted to check it out for fun, which showed me nothing, that shoulder to waist to inseam do not correlate. So as I said, height versus shoulder to waist shows a light upward trend. Height versus inseam displays a clear positive relationship, and shoulder to waist to inseam is scattered with little to no trend. Hi, y'all. Okay, so I hope that was enough deep dives on people's body measurements that we could handle when we are not technical designers. And now I want to move to shopping habits and attitudes. So I asked everyone, where do you shop? And these were the top 25 responses. I will read them out in case folks can't see. So overwhelmingly, which was not surprising to me and is probably also not surprising to any of our plus size friends in the audience, the top 4 answers were Torrid, Old Navy, Target, and Lane Bryant. The next largest one was actually in the scheme of things, smaller brand called Universal Standard. And a lot of people may not have heard of Universal Standard, but they are immediately following these giant stores that we have all heard of, even if we don't shop in them. And that is because Universal Standard is, aside from my brand, one of the most inclusive brands that exist. So they are really picking up the slack that everyone else is dropping, and this is the result. Following them, I'll just go through them quickly, is Amazon, unfortunately, Walmart, Eloquii, Big Bud Press, Madewell, Gap, Shein, H&M, Kohl's, ASOS, Nordstrom, Lands' End, Macy's, Athleta, Anthropologie, Bloom Chic, Hot Topic, J. Crew, Cooper Union, and Fashion Brand Company. And if that was not enough, here are the rest. And I only included ones that at least 2 people have mentioned, and they go from most mentions to least mentions, left to right. And what I'd really like to point out here, and really also in this chart, but here as well, is the huge variance in type of brands that are included here. And I bring up this point because I think, again, in all of these silly arguments to not make clothes for the majority of people, is that, plus size people don't want fun clothes, or they're a niche market, which makes absolutely no sense. But as a small business owner who is on this list, I know firsthand that when you show customers that you see them, you hear them, you show them things that they can relate to, and you make clothes that fit them well, they will come back to you and spend their money with you time and time again. And what that has ended up with is companies like Big Bud Press and Cooper Union and Fashion Brand Company, who are all small businesses, and Lucy and Yak, Peridot Robes, Smart Glamour, Connolly Goods, all listed higher than companies like QVC, Eddie Bauer, LL Bean, Lululemon, Mara Hoffman, right? Brands that way more people know of. Plus size customers are listing them less. Small brands that have no funding, plus-size customers are listing them more. Then I also asked everyone, can you shop online can you shop in person or can you only shop online? Now, if you wear straight sizes in this room, you can go to any store and you never have to think, will there be something in here that fits me? That is not true for the majority of people in this country. Have to stress, majority of people. And showing here, 46% of the 300 people I measured can shop in person, while over half of them have to shop online because they cannot shop in person. Now, I did not ask this question, but when I asked, can you shop in person, 26% of people added the fact they cannot shop in person because they do not carry their size. So they answered with additional information that I did not ask for because that is how strongly it lives in their brain. Okay, so now for a little fun game. These are some body shapes of people: apple, hourglass, rectangle, pear, and inverted triangle. Now, a lot of times people bring up body shapes, mostly unfortunately under the topic of how do we hide these body shapes to make them look like the only body shape we care about, which is hourglass. That's not why I'm bringing it up. I'm bringing it up because bodies are varied and they come in different shapes. So I'm going to ask the room, which body shape do you think is most common? Just yell it out. Rectangle?
Apple.
Apple? Pear? Anyone think it's hourglass? So before I show you my study, I wanted to give you extra information that in 2005, there was a study done at North Carolina State University that measured 6,000 women, way more than I could do. 46% of them were rectangle shaped, just over 20 were pear shaped, just under 14 were apple shaped, and only 8% were hourglass shaped. So let's see what I found. 66% were pear, 25 were rectangle, 5 were hourglass, 1.5 were apple, 1.5 were inverted triangle, and less than 1 were undefined. The undefined folks were basically smack in the middle between two body shapes, like being just shy of being a true hourglass, but also not a rectangle is basically what happened there. And this is how those body shapes trend across sizes. So pear is in every size. Does not matter what size range you're at, there's probably somebody that's shaped like a pear. But some of the other shapes pop up and then disappear. So hourglass shapes are present only in the waist measurements below 49 inches. Pear dominates consistently but begins to decline slightly as waist increases. Rectangle becomes more prominent from mid-waist and upward, and apple only appears in higher waist sizes above 45 inches. So then I wanted to take a look at, well, what are the shapes of the size charts at the stores where these people shop? So I took a look at the first 4 biggest shopped at stores, which were Torrid, Old Navy, Target, and Lane Bryant. Torrid, everyone is a pear. So every size at Torrid is shaped for a pear-shaped body. So if you have a pear-shaped body and you shop at Torrid, that's probably why, because it fits you pretty well. Old Navy, 44 to 22 is a pear, 14 to 22 is a pear, 24 to 30 is a rectangle. So I didn't pull any of the stats except for Lane Bryant, and I'll explain more in a second, below the waist size that I measured for. So Target, 16 to 18 is rectangle, 20 to 30 is pear. Lane Bryant, medium to 2X is pear, 3X to 7X is rectangle. So a Lane Bryant medium is not the same as a straight size medium you would see other places. So that corresponds to the 34-inch waistline. And then I wanted to look at a few of the other stores that people shop at, but not as much as these stores. Obviously there's many, 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 so I just grabbed a few. So at Shein, everyone's a pear also. And this is a very interesting stat to me because in many, many talks that I give about bodies and sizing, people always report thinking that Shein offers a lot of plus size options. And they'll say, you know, I don't want to shop Shein, but I have to because it's the only place I can find things. Actually, I've didn't include this here, but I know from the last talk I gave on this, only 10% of Shein items come in plus sizes and fit the average consumer. The reason it feels like more is because Shein makes an ungodly amount of clothes. So when you go to Shein's site, there are 4,500 dresses to sort through. 450 of them come in plus size. Now, 450 dresses is already too many dresses, so that feels like a lot of dresses. And so you think they make a lot of clothes for plus size people, but they actually don't in comparison to the amount of clothes they make. So anyway, off of that tangent. ASOS, 18 to 26 are pair, and 28 to 30 rectangle. Fashion Brand Company, this is one of the small businesses that folks really liked. Extra large and 1X is hourglass, 2X is 6X is pair. J. Crew, everything is an hourglass until the largest size, which is a rectangle. And I think this was really interesting because I was actually surprised to see stores like J. Crew pop up in these responses, because in my mind, a lot of those stores really don't serve plus size customers. And I think if I had more time, and maybe sometime over the summer, I'll go back and see what size of the people from the study listed J. Crew, right? Because it was probably the smaller end of who I measured. That would be my hypothesis. Levi's, 1X and 2X are pair, 3X is rectangle. And at Mar Hoffman, everyone is a pair. So then I really wanted to take a look at, are these people buying the right size clothes? So this is, again, something that I think I would like to spend way more time doing, but it's very time consuming. So I selected a decent set of people who, when I asked them, where do you shop, went straight for telling me Torrid or straight for telling me Target, like strong identity with shopping at those stores. And I grabbed their data and I compared the size they tell me they buy with the size perhaps they should be buying according to the measurements I took compared to the Torrid and Target size charts. So 66.7% of them do not buy the right size clothes. 33.3 do. Of those people, 62.5% of them are between sizes on the charts of the stores they shop in, while 37.5% are set size. So then I thought to myself, well, I wonder if it's the set size people who are buying the right size clothes. No. Of the people who fit squarely into the size chart, 66.7% of them are not buying the right size clothes. 33.3 are. So I think the thing about shopping and size charts that I touched on before is that we're not made off of charts. So very often you look at a size chart, you're between. Then you have to play the game of, do I size up? Do I size down? Does this thing have stretch? How do I know, right? Maybe you buy a few things and you try them on and you return them. We've all been there. And then I think the other part, there's deeper parts of this. One of which being, and I also know this because I'm endlessly nerdy and ask people lots of questions and collect data all the time. How do you feel about getting measured? When's the last time you got measured? All that information. I've had lots of conversations around that, and a lot of people don't measure themselves. And a lot of people also shop online. So I think that's just kind of a recipe for buying the wrong size. And then you might ask yourself, well, but how does that work though? Because you buy clothes, then you put them on, and if they don't fit you, you're gonna get rid of them, right? Well, something that I talk about in my inclusive fashion pattern making class is a quick little mini study I did into Target specifically, which happens to be one of these two brands that I used right here. And I looked at 25 tops that Target offers. Only one of them had a defined waist. I just went to blouses, Target, women's, first 25 that pop up. 24 out of the 25 are shaped like tents. The one that had a waist has elastic in the waist. I forget the exact number, but the majority of them either did not have sleeves or had very loose sleeves. So I don't believe this is an accident, that the designers are making shapeless things with stretch. It's because they want less returns. So if you're someone who doesn't really measure themselves and you just want to best guess, most of the time you'll probably be all right if that's what you're buying. But that shouldn't be your only option. And then just 3 more stats that I thought were interesting. 42.8% of participants mentioned Torrid and or Lane Bryant as their only options. I would just like all the straight-sized people in the room for a moment to think about the fact that you would only have 2 stores to shop in. 2. 7.8% mentioned making their own clothes. Woo. Love it. And 23.3% mentioned preferring to thrift shop. Also woo. Good job, guys. Oh, this might be my favorite part of the study. So, I asked everyone, how happy are you with the state of fashion clothes that you are able to buy on a scale of 1 to 10? You will see that 9 and 10 are not represented here. That's because no one said them. What's really interesting to me as the data started coming in was how many people were saying 4 and how many people were saying 7. Obviously, I think there's probably some deeper psychology into like why we pick the numbers that we pick and whatnot, but those are 2 clearly the front runners, followed by 3 and 6, and then 5, then 2, then 8, then 1. So I thought to myself, I wonder what the people who said the different numbers might have in common. So this is the waist size compared to the number that people gave. The bigger the waist, the lower the number. Not surprising, but nice to have actual statistic data proving it, right? Then I also asked, what is the biggest obstacle to shopping for you? So I did give people the option to say 2 or more of these, which then became overwhelmingly the response. But the next thing following that was access to clothing in my size. That was followed by access to ethical or sustainable options, followed by access to my personal style, and surprisingly, last was access to my price point. So it's really not so much that people are focused on how much does something cost, as much as they are focused on, can I get this on my body? Then I asked, what is most important to you while shopping? And overwhelmingly, the answer was good fit. And I would really like all of my fashion designer folks to specifically pay attention to this slide, because the thing that nobody answered was trendiness or being in fashion. So we went from good fit to style alignment with my personal taste to size access to ethics or sustainability to affordability. Again, people want clothes that fit them well when they put them on their bodies. Everything else comes after that. Then I thought to myself, so many people said that they were shopping online, and not everyone told me that it was because they didn't have access, so let me just check. If you had access to better, more interesting, or more accessible clothing stores where you live, would you shop in person more often, or would you stick to shopping online only? Overwhelmingly, 91.5% of people said they would shop in person. Do I think that literally all of those people would absolutely shop in person all the time? No, because online is just easy, and I get that. But I do hear a lot from fashion industry trade publications, like, why are retail stores closing? Why can't we get people in retail stores? Well, maybe if we had retail stores that fit the average person, more people would walk through the door. Seems like common sense to me. And then this was really just for fun. All the plus size people are already laughing. Because I asked, what would you never want to see or buy again? I should have honestly stayed on the last slide and had you guys just yell it out. And I know everyone would have said cold shoulder tops. Straight size people in the room are looking at me like, what are you talking about? Because no one does this for straight size people. Cold shoulder tops are tops where the shoulders are cut out. So there's still straps here, but then this is missing. And it is overwhelmingly a plus size option. It will not die. We don't know why. Everyone hates it, and yet we keep making it. The next thing that I thought was really interesting was that the next 2 answers negate each other. So people don't want shapeless boxy styles, and people also don't want bodycon fitted styles. And I actually really love that that happened, because I think it just further proves another point that I often bring up in other talks, that plus size people are not a monolith. They don't all want the same clothes, and we need to stop assuming that they do. When folks say to me, and this has literally happened in classes, so please don't think that it doesn't, that plus size people don't want fun, stylish, avant-garde clothes, and that's why I don't make them for them. I used to just ask a simple question, which was, do you think all straight size people wear the same clothes? And they say, no, of course not. I'm like, okay, well then why do you think that about plus size people? But then I decided that moving forward I needed some data, and so I did some research online, and I asked a bunch of people to tell me, describe your style in 3 to 5 words. And then I asked them, are you straight size or are you plus size? And then I made 2 word clouds. And I bring that up in my inclusive class, and I ask people to guess which word cloud is which, and they absolutely cannot. The biggest word in both of the word clouds is comfortable, followed by things like classic, fun, eccentric, colorful, vintage. They all exist in both word clouds, so we really got to let that go. Yeah, and then just some other interesting things that supposedly people don't want to see anymore. But really, I think let's get rid of cold shoulder tops, and let's just keep everything else and everyone buy what you want. So, to wrap up, I want to close this portion of the presentation with a quote, another quote from that same book. And actually 2 quotes, there's one on the next slide too, spoiler. So, also from over 100 years ago, 1917, a New York Times article entitled, "The Nation's Bill for Correcting Manufacturers' Errors is $300 million annually." Then the quote, "Not more than 2% of wearers can be fitted accurately without alterations. Not more than 10 to 15% can be fitted even approximately without snipping something here or changing something there. Roughly, this means that 85 to 90% out of every 100 garments sold at retail in this country in the course of a year have to be altered, with the duplication of labor and expense that is entailed." Now, I do want to add the caveat that this is from 1917, so there was no spandex. And they were, at that time, much more entrenched in like people all kind of wearing the same style of clothes, and fitted clothes were still pretty heavily popular. So fitted clothes with no stretch really makes it hard to fit people. But I do truly believe that we didn't get much better at making clothes. We just changed the type of clothes we make. We added spandex into almost everything, and designers and stores have popularized loose, swingy, tenty shapes. I feel like even if I attempted to look for clothes online, I would be inundated with a bunch of stuff that I don't really want, because I like wearing form-fitted things. And the only reason that I'm able to do that is because I make them to fit myself, right? But the majority of people would have to buy something and get it tailored. And this has also been the case since 1917. And then a quote directly from Lauren Downing Peters, which I think is just a really wonderful way to sum this all up, which is, "The problems presented by the conventions of ready-to-wear are not necessarily specific to fat women. Regardless of weight, the human body is ill-suited to the conventions and processes of mass manufacturing and exists as a notable pressure point within these systems. Within the context of ready-to-wear as an industry, the very conventions of standard sizing were built upon a flawed foundation, which took as its basis not a real body, but a statistical pastiche rooted in classical notions of beauty and symmetry." So what I'd like you to take away is, 1, plus-size people are not a niche market. Instead, they are an underserved majority market, and they deserve our attention, research, care, and respect. 2nd, human beings are varied and do not scale up evenly at all parts of their body at equal speed. When grading for mass manufacturing, we should be using real data from a large group of folks paying attention to correlation and trend. And last, which is something that I've argued to manufacturers many times about, even if it takes a few more moments to input the grade rules individually, which grading is how things scale up and down, it will be worth it in the long run. Less returns, less waste, happier customers. Thank you so much. And we're just going to move the microphone over to open the floor for Q&A. I ask that if you have a question, please raise your hand, and please speak into the mic so that the video recording that is archived can hear your question. Anyone? Yes? Wait, come up.
Was there anything that surprised you in the data from the measurements? And then also considering what class you teach, how do you plan to take some of this data in as you teach your next courses?
Great question. Thank you so much. So, did anything surprise me? As far as it went to body measurements, no. As I mentioned, I've been measuring people for a decade. So this was really less about collecting data for me as it was about collecting data for everyone else. And also making this type of study important in an institutional system, right? Just making it exist, making the data accessible here. I would say that maybe one thing that surprised me was like the body shapes, although it does seem, obviously I got different results than the North Carolina study. They measured way more people. It didn't surprise me that like hourglass was not the most popular, but I think a guess of apple being higher is something that I would have also leaned to, and that wasn't really the case. When it comes to my classes, so for those who don't know, I teach many, many, many classes. I teach for undergrad, I also teach for continuing education adults, and I teach for pre-college. The inclusive fashion pattern making class that I mentioned quickly is a continuing education class. It's a non-credit class that I created. So before I got here, it did not exist, and I clearly saw the need for it. And in that class, day one is a lecture, kind of similar to this. Day 2 and 3 is learning the technique of changing a pattern to fit any size person. And I say any size person to hopefully catch more people, because then I make them make it for a plus size fit model. But it's the same technique for anyone. You do the same things, the same steps, you just use different numbers. And then they make a creative design to fit that model. And that model comes in and tries it on in muslin, which is like practice fabric, for those who don't know. Then they make edits to the patterns accordingly. Then they make it again out of fashion fabric, real fabric, and the model comes back again on the last day and tries it on again. I'm currently teaching it now. My fit model is here. Yes, thank you, lovely Patricia. I've taught it many, many times, and I hope to continue teaching it. And I would really, the goal is to make it accessible to our undergrad students, and I'm not really sure what the route of that will be currently. I don't currently teach pattern making to undergrad, but what I do is in every class I teach, I find a way to sneak this kind of conversation in, unsurprisingly. So in my sewing classes, we talk about sustainability, and I can't talk about sustainability without talking about this. In any class I teach where there's a pattern involved, I either teach or I offer to teach people how to alter their patterns to fit them better. I just spend a lot of extra time making sure that this gets brought up. Thank you. Yes? No, it's okay.
Thank you so much for doing this. This is great. Literally last night in a class, we were having a conversation of how companies are deeply uninterested in exploring this market for many reasons. And one of them that came up was specifically that the customer is price conscious. So I love to see on this right here. I know this is being archived, but I was boiling in my seat. So you mentioned that this is going to be available for students and other industry professionals. Mm-hmm. So in light of that, mm-hmm. who have you been seeing, or have you been seeing companies become more interested? Do you expect that this is going to be something relevant that people will be starting to look for. I appreciate that it's being made available, but are people seeking it? I guess is the question.
That's a great question. So before I answer the main question, I want to touch on the price thing, because price is another barrier that people like to give for not making plus sizes, because they'll say, oh, well, I don't want to pass on a price to the customer because I would clearly have to charge more. No, you have to change the way that you cost your garments. If you cost off of the average person, who is a 1X, 2X, 3X, depending on your chart, you don't have to change the prices for plus size people. I think it's when companies approach plus sizes like a totally different human being, totally different animal, and they cost everything differently, they do everything differently, then that's how they end up with different prices, and that's how they end up having to upcharge you and or lose money, which doesn't make any sense. But are people seeking this out? I wish more people were. I did not create this or suggest the grant because like people were knocking down my door asking me for plus size data, unfortunately. I will say that like when I bring these things up in classes, students are incredibly receptive. You know, I think sometimes some faculty and staff may have an opinion of students that like they don't care about these things and they're just happy to kind of go along with what we've been doing. But as soon as I mention it, people are on board. I mean, I have undergrad students in this room right here, right now with me because they care. So really the goal is not so much, or the reason was not so much that people were like begging for it, but more so that like the students deserve to have the access to this and also to know that the topic exists, to know to ask for the access to it. Yeah, thank you. Anything else? Sure. Over here and then here.
Just as sort of a quick follow-up to that, how do we actually get this information out to the world to start getting standardized sizing so that clothes fit people like people?
Great question. So, I mean, I hope to have, I think about 3 different publications who are going to be talking about this, which is certainly going to be helpful. And then again, I mean, the whole reason that I decided to really heavily pivot to teaching is because I was having a lot of conversation in my Instagram DMs with people saying, okay, well, if you get this and you're doing all this and you're one person, why don't other people get it? And my response, once I really like thought on it, was like, well, those people that work in those industries come from fashion schools. And so if the people in the fashion schools are not being taught about it, they're just going to go straight into the industry doing what everyone else is doing. So that's really like the, not a quick answer, and I'm so sorry, but like that's the real answer, is that like the people that we're training need to know to care and need to have access to these measurements and pay attention to them and then go into the world and bring this information with them. In addition to just continuing to be loud about it. I mean, when I started my company in 2014, it was not too long after like social media at all had started. And social media really did so much for plus size fashion because it democratized people's voices, right? Not so much anymore because everything got bought by everything and algorithms are terrible. But at the beginning, man, you could really get content in front of a lot of people. And that created the phenomenon of plus size bloggers. And companies realized how much money those people were making. And they started making changes to follow that money. Unfortunately, in the past few years, we've really seen a decline of that. And I attribute that to the fact that the people at the top never really cared. Right? They were listening because they were getting yelled at. And then they stopped getting yelled at, or the algorithm changed and they didn't see the yelling. And they go, oh, actually, I'm going to back right up because I didn't actually care to start with. Right? So then that kind of circles back to the more long-term answer that like the people in the fashion industry are the people who have to shift in order to make really big change happen. Oh, and then I did want to touch on the fact that standardized sizing. So sizing will never be consistent between brands. I'm so sorry to tell you. We got to let that go. It's never going to happen. There's too many companies. They make too many different types of things for too many different customers in too many different production facilities and too many different size ranges. It's not going to happen. So what can happen, though, is companies pay more attention to real data and make their clothes fit better, and then customers become more engaged, more educated on themselves and their bodies, and also how clothes are made, where clothes are made, et cetera, and shop accordingly. Kind of like all of that has to happen at the same time. Thank you. Okay, here.
Hello, everybody. All right, so you said that people weren't knocking down your door to get this information?
Well, okay, she knocked my door.
Knocking down your door for this information.
Okay, nobody except Cha-Cha.
Okay, so hi, everybody. My name is Cha-Cha Hudson, and I'm a PhD student at Iowa State University. My focus is on inclusive design, so not just plus size, but people with cognitive, physical disabilities, trans people, people who are marginalized in the fashion industry, and that's where my focus is. So I knocked down your door so I can get information. I'm defending my dissertation next week.
Woo!
And you helped me out so much. So for my dissertation, I developed an open educational resource. So it's a free textbook on how to design for plus sizes. So you'll be able to get some of Professor Dunn's information inside of that open educational resource, which means people don't have the excuse that I don't know how to do it. There's no resources available for me to do it. There's a resource and it's free and you can access it. Anybody can access it. So what are you going to do with that information? So I want to say thank you publicly for helping me out so much.
Thank you. Anyone else? Sure.
Hi. So, I was wondering if you see a possibility in a rise of, instead of standard sizing, moving more towards like pre-industrial revolution custom fit and going to a tailor and making that more affordable and more accessible to people rather than working with standard sizing, because that's way more accessible for people.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And my answer is I wish. Not really, not like your average mainstream person. I mean, no, I think in the age of Amazon, it's really hard to think that like people are going to all of a sudden be like, you know what, instead of Amazon, I'm going to go to the person down the street and wait for them to custom make me something. But I really, really wish. But I do agree with you that, like, in my opinion, that's really the way forward. I also think it's not just an inclusion play, it's a sustainability play, because we will be making way less waste. I will say, so my company, Smart Glamour, was built from day one to be customizable. So people could buy things directly off the size chart. They could also customize things a la carte. So I want this dress, but I want short sleeves. Or they could send me fully their measurements and I would make it custom to fit them. And that was just why I started the brand, literally for that reason, because I wanted to help people get clothes that fit them better. And so it would have never existed without that purpose. And the only reason that I pivoted to education, as I mentioned before, because I feel it's really important to share this information with future fashion designers, but also because I was a one-woman show that got very burnt out. And people are not really super pumped to give someone who's hand-making physical goods a bunch of money. And what kind of drove me up a wall was, like, once I really decided to pivot, I then went to a panel discussion about sustainability, and they were talking about how mass customization is really on the rise and like a new hot thing, and so maybe we should invest in it. And I was just like, where was that so many years ago? There is a production company called Resonance, which uses a platform called One. I actually am in the middle of trying to schedule a chat with them so that I can talk about them better. But they are an example of a production company that does made to order and does small batch and is really doing so with the focus on sustainability. So I'm really curious to hear their feedback on, like, made to order plus customization and how could that happen, because aside from people's desire to get things immediately, which we really have to fight back against, I believe that we have the technology and the resources to do it. So it's just about getting enough people to care to do it. So not currently, but hopefully. Anyone else? Okay. Oop, all right.
Thank you so much for this. As a non-fashion student or clothing maker, I'm just curious, what what role can average plus-size consumers take in order to help changes be made in the ways that you hope for them to?
That's a great question. So before I answer that specific question, I'm going to instead turn it over to straight-size people, because I think, as we've proven and as I've said many times, plus-size people just don't have the options, which means they don't have the privilege that straight-size people have. So first, to every straight-size person in this room, I would love to encourage you to only shop at stores that also make plus-size clothes. And you might feel in your body that feels really hard, and I don't think I can do that. And I would like you to sit with why you think you can't do that, right? And then I would also ask straight-size people to be allies and advocates to their plus-size friends, to ask companies to make plus-size versions of their clothes, to ask for better representation and imagery, all of those things. So when it comes to plus-size folks, I mean, first of all, buy clothes where you can find them, right? Then I would say if you're able to, if you have the access to, through money and size, shop small where possible. So many small businesses really, 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 really deeply care. And yes, it may take longer to get their goods, and yes, they may be more expensive, but most of the time they're going to fit you better, they're going to last you longer, and you're also supporting a small business owner who really, really cares about what they're doing. So some of those stores I mentioned earlier, Connolly Goods, Peridot Robes, Fashion Brand Company, Copper Union, those are all small businesses who really, really care and are using models that look like you and are doing things that are better for the planet. So where you can, shop with them. And even if you can't shop with them, interacting with their social media profiles is free, right? Share their content, like their stuff, comment on it, be word of mouth for other people. We truly kind of have to lean on community. I know that with Smart Glamour, community was all of it. It was everything. I think being a part of fostering that community for other businesses who do care about you is a great thing to do. Oh, okay. Yes, please. No, of course.
If you mentioned this earlier, I apologize before I came in, but
Sure.
what do you see as the role of there's hostility toward fat people, right? Just to our existence.
Yeah.
I'm curious what you see happening as the people of the world continue to get larger. Do you see that hostility shifting, and is there a clothing and economic impact, with all of that? And thank you.
I didn't touch on that before. That's a good question. I mean, a lot of times when people ask me, why aren't other people doing this? When I just give them a very quick answer, it's that because people are fatphobic, right? There's really no other way around the majority of people being something and everyone going, no, I don't want their money, right? There's a reason. And, there's people that work in this industry, whether they're famous designers that you've heard of or teachers that you haven't, who say really terrible things about fat people. And that directly affects the things that get made for you, right? It truly doesn't make sense to me. It's never made sense to me, not just because it makes money, but because people are people. They deserve to be clothed. They deserve to feel good. Who cares what they look like? I don't. And I mean, again, this kind of just ties back to how it really has to be a big holistic response, because changing societal beliefs about a group of people that we don't like, is hard and takes a long time and takes a lot of people working at it. It can't just be fashion designers, right? It also has to be like people that cast movies and TV. We have to decide, like, who do we platform, who do we look at as cool and good, right? I know that when I used to cast models for Smart Glamour all the time, I just cast anyone. I didn't care if they modeled before. I don't care how tall they are. I don't care if they can wear heels, if they wear glasses, if they have tattoos, do they have hair? I don't care. Everybody. And, I never really thought about when I started doing it, the impact it was going to have on the models. But telling someone that they're a model really means a lot to them. And that in turn means a lot to me. And I just hope that continues to spread, because that's really the only thing that's going to cut back against the hostility against folks. And that, goes for trans folks, goes for disabled folks, goes for anyone that is seen as an other, no matter how many of them there are. Thank you. Any last questions? Yes. Yeah, sure.
I'm curious, especially because your slides showed how people don't buy their correct size. Probably also because we don't know our measurements. I know your measurements sort of validated some that I'd already taken, that I was doing it accurately, which was really nice.
Great.
But do you find, even in classes where anyone does their own body measurements, that people are surprised where they fit on a size chart versus, what we think?
Yes.
And did anyone say when you were measuring them that, they were surprised by
Yes.
the data?
People do not know where different parts of their body are. I learned a lot about measuring 300 people, especially the people I measured virtually, because the people I measured in person, I was just measuring you. And we didn't really have to talk about anything other than so how was your commute over here? Isn't it crazy getting into this building? How did you find out about this thing? But to the people I measured virtually, I had to go through every step with them. And I was doing it along with them so that they could visually see. And I was turning and showing them where to place it and giving them notes and whatnot. But the amount of people that don't know where their waist is astounding. But I don't say that to be shameful of those people at all. I think we live in a society that has made everyone terrified of their bodies. And when you're terrified of your body and what other people are going to think of it, you don't really want to be in touch with where your waist is. So I get it. So you have to come up with tricks so that people know where to put the tape. And that happens in my classes too. When we alter patterns and I'm okay, measure your waist, no one knows where it is. So I actually had a continuing ed student the other day ask me if I could propose a workshop about how to take your measurements and demystifying size charts, which I think is a great idea. My schedule is pretty packed. My husband is please don't do that. But I could probably find a day to do a quick workshop on it. Because I do think it's really important. And there were a few people who, when I sent them, every single person I sent their measurements back to them, so that they had them, unless they told me they didn't want them, which there was a few people who did say that, and that's fine, and I respected that. But a lot of people mostly just responded with thank you. I mean, I should have included a slide of, when I first had people signing up for this, there was do you have any questions or comments? And I mean, literally 90% of them were some version of thank you. Everyone was just so incredibly grateful to be a part of the study, which I, in turn, am incredibly grateful for. So a lot of the responses to sending the measurements were just thank you. And then there were a few just clarifying questions, what does this mean, and so on and so forth. Well, that's okay, we don't need it anymore. But I don't think, not too much overwhelming surprise. I think it was more as we were actually doing it, people learning parts of their body and where to accurately put tape. Yeah. Yes?
I'm wondering how you cope with body and weight fluctuation within your design process.
That's a really good question. I don't personally, in my designs, design things really to intentionally fluctuate. I know there's a lot of people who are working on different types of designs that involve like drawstrings and things like that, things that you can like snap and unsnap. And I think that's all super interesting and totally something that exists in the world. I also think that like I personally have to let go of the concept that I can make everything that everyone needs. Because I can't, because I'm one person. So I personally focus more on making things that fit people for the body they have right now. And also like affirming that like whatever body you have right now is worth a garment that fits it nicely, that is comfortable. Thank you. That is comfortable and stylish and that you love and that you'll take care of and that you'll cherish and that you'll wear as long as you can wear it. And also that like it's okay that if in the future it doesn't fit you anymore. If you feel like that's a permanent change, okay, then let's resell, let's thrift, right? But if you feel like it's a fluctuating type of change, then let's store it maybe for a later time when it does fit you. So like I do think that there are a lot of designers who are focusing on that. I think my personal design focus is more just like reaffirming that whatever body anyone shows up in is okay and is worthy of a beautiful garment. Anything else? All right, so we'll go ahead and close it out. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. As I mentioned many, many times, this video of this presentation and all of the exact data of everyone's measurements will be available. If you attended this or if you are a participant, don't need to worry. I will email it to you, and I will also be sharing it on all of my social medias. If the publications that I think might talk about this, I will also be sharing that on social media. So if you follow me, my Instagram handle is smart_glamour. You can find me on LinkedIn under my name, Facebook, Smart Glamour, all those places. And I would appreciate, just resharing and supporting that information once it's out. Thank you so much, everyone.